clicker, so I'll do this. All right, so you've already got our names, Aaron, Pressie, and Ben Rader. We've already kind of gotten some feedback from the group on who you all are, so we're already well into the presentation. And so the next question we have, who am I, and why do I do what I do? If any of us take a moment in the day and really ask ourselves this question, we're going to find out at any given time we can have multiple different answers. I could say I'm Ben, and I'm a therapist, and I'm doing what I did because I need to pay the bills, and I have to take care of my family, right? It could be I'm Ben, and I'm a therapist, and I learned how to care for people, and now I want to share that with other people on a given day. On a given day, I might think of myself as a professor, or I might think of myself as a father, or I might think of myself as a husband. And all of these things then kind of shape my narrative of who I am and why do I do what I do. And when it really comes down to it, what we're often trying to figure out in society, and especially when we're serving people, the person across the table from us, who are you? And why do you do what you do? That's a question we're asking in mental health all the time. Teachers ask versions of that. Foster parents ask versions of that. Parents ask their children sometimes that in this kind of voice. Why are you doing what are you doing? And the kid always says, I don't know. So this is our exploration today. We're going to kind of figure out why do people do what they do. And we often look at this from what we could call a deficit model. Oftentimes, if someone's doing something, we're looking at it from a deficit model. And someone will say, well, it's just genetics. You know, there's something about in your genes that's causing this kind of behavior to happen. It's just genetics. Raise your hand if you've heard people explain things this way. Genetically, this is why you're doing the thing. We can look at impairment, cognitive impairment, sometimes. We're thinking about things that are limits that an individual has. Why does somebody have a hard time reading? Well, because of cognitive impairments. And that's kind of, it's a description, but we use it sometimes as an explanation. Why is it that people do the way things that they do? Why don't you think clearer about this? Why aren't you making better decisions? Well, there must be an impairment that's causing that. And then we have psychopathology in general. And that can be anything under the sun. But the idea for us in mental health now, we're trained to look at the brain. So there could be a dopaminergic problem, which means there's a brain system that's not functioning that has to do with dopamine. Or a serotonergic system. Serotonin isn't getting through the way it should, and that's why the person is doing what they're doing. So we often have explanations in our system that are deficit models. You want to share anything about the deficit model? Now, today we're going to look at something a little bit different, and in fact, the term social factors can kind of broaden this conversation a little bit. And what social factors are, they're the things outside of the person that might influence their behavior. And what we have up here, how aspects of social life influence our behavior. This may have to do with social experiences, interpersonal relationships, social identity, and belonging in distinct and specific ways. How others see us and respond to us shapes, in turn, how we see ourselves, and ultimately, how then we engage with others and in the world. Now, in general, comparing this to the deficit model, who finds this seems to be a little bit better explanation for why people do what they do? Social influences, things that influence us, for sure. Because it takes into account that the individual is not just a microscopic organism living by itself. We all do things because of the way people react around us. Sometimes in those deficit models, we don't consider what's been done to people in social settings, that it also explains why they do what they're doing. We don't consider what's happening around them. We start looking inside of them and we start making assumptions about them being broken. When really there's things that they've experienced that might explain this, right? All right, well, we're going to get into some of these today. We're going to chat a little bit about this, and I can see I'm in the room of experts. And these are things that sometimes experts on social factors, these are some factors that we may say, and if you're thinking kind of our children now involved in the system, and we're looking at them as the persons that we're serving, and we're trying to figure out what might be shaping their behavior, this is what research has sometimes pointed to, and this is what perspectives often focus on in the community. And there are, we're going to talk about 4 of them today. We can talk about poverty, lack of access. How does that shape behavior? We can think about racism and race identity, internal and external racism, how that shapes behavior. We can think about peer influence, how that shapes behavior. And we can think about social media, how that shapes behavior. And all of these are things that are happening outside of the individual. These are happening to the person. These are happening around the person. And they aren't necessarily focused on the deficit within, but they also can explain some things, right? Okay, so let's play around with this. Poverty. I'd like a courageous, some options, some courageous voices here, sharing how might poverty shape a youth's behavior? How might poverty shape the youth's behavior?
Well, as you stated, it's a lack of access, and so for the inner children, it's not being able to know what's outside of their near immediate community.
Yep.
Like going out to farms and seeing how fruits are grown.
Yeah.
Being able to eat different vegetables.
Yes.
So they're all fixed on a fixed income, in a fixed perspective, in a fixed environment, in a fixed community that's isolated from what's out there where other children have access to.
Your first name?
Loose.
Brought up what I find fantastic, excellent observation. Poverty of experience, poverty of exposure. You know, not just material poverty, but what else is out there. And our children, when they lack social access, when they lack material access, they lack experiences that are beyond. So poverty of experience. Yeah, that's powerful. Another one here.
Yeah, just thinking in terms of the basic needs not being met, so food insecurity or any of those other types of things. If you're hungry, you're not able to think or manifest those different types of realities.
Food insecurity. Who's thinking about their behavior in school if you're worried about your food, you know? So what are people thinking about? How does that influence behavior? Thank you. First name is?
Demetria.
Demetria. Thank you, Demetria. And first name and then share. Sonia.
They probably would lack like the ability to grow and develop in their brain because their brain is in the fight or flight mode all the time. We're trying to gather resources that they might not have or to protect themselves, and so that their brain is constantly fighting or flighting, and so they're not able to develop and learn, and they're not able to grow.
So we've got this person who's experiencing poverty and they're at risk all the time. Their group defenses are up. That fight or flight thing is happening because they're lacking access.
Danita.
Danita, welcome. Thank you.
An accumulation of all the responses and the parking mindset. So even after I am safe, my brain is still responding to past conditions, and I cannot perform in the new conditions that are now.
Now this is really where science has really started rolling in, and we know this is a fact. And the reality is, after you've experienced poverty, you continue to experience lack of security constantly. And there's even research that says epigenetically, which means across generations, if somebody who's food insecure while they're pregnant will create, the child that is born out of that will often have scarcity issues. They don't remember it, but they experience this feeling that things are not here, and metabolism changes. So the body starts holding on to calories because it's worried it's not going to get another meal. All right? I had a hand up here.
Broken.
Grover.
Poverty will also spur criminal behavior. If
Talk
I'm
about it.
hungry, I'm going to shoplift
Yeah.
to get food.
Yeah, poverty will. Now, and is this really psychopathology? Now think about that. If I don't have food, if I don't have access, taking something under that circumstance is very different from when I had learned some years back that when a rider was caught shoplifting. You know, someone with money and resources, that's psychopathology. Somebody stealing that doesn't have food, that's survival. So poverty chums the water for some of these behaviors. We're going to go on to the next one in a minute. Pass
We have a
the
question
time.
over here.
Oh yeah, please. Yes, yes.
It just made me think when it comes to mapping our identities, when I think about poverty, it shows me how people either, based off of their experience in poverty, how they operate either out of love or survival.
Yes.
It just made me really think of that terminology, and people either go on living life and doing things and creating and building relationships, whether they're either genuine or they're intentional, will shape their character, morals, and values, depending on how you portray it.
So now we're really looking at how the person who's becomes the caretaker, how they've been shaped by these things. How does that shape how they work with the person they're caring for? I've often had people tell me, Dr. Ben, the problem with my son is he's stealing food. And I'll say, where's he stealing it from? From the fridge. And I'll tell him, you can't steal from what's yours. He's sneaking food. I'll give you that, eating between meals. But when you have a poverty of mind, of resources, what happens is whatever small amount of food is in the house, everyone's coveting. Everyone's fighting for it. And now I belong as the owner of the home. This is my food and they're stealing from me. The parent who has that moving out of love realizes they're eating unhealthily and they're having unhealthy behaviors around eating. However, you're not stealing from what's yours already. Does that make sense? The poverty of access drives some of the way we think about food and how much we have and whether we have enough to share.
Can I just speak in?
Yes, of course, please.
Because I want to build on what she said, and my poverty thought is that many of us have a poverty of love. We have a lack of that in our lives, even just looking at our families, our generations and the different cutoffs and the disengagement and things that are, inside of our families.
Yeah.
It's just not enough love.
And let's move out of the financially impoverished neighborhoods and continue having a conversation, because there's a poverty of love in wealthy and affluent families too. And sometimes we get to become wealthy and affluent because of a poverty experience that we had earlier, and we may now have riches of materials, but we're still pretty prude about love. I had a kid one time, we were at a school, and the youth said to me, well, we were poor, but we didn't know it. My mom and dad on Sundays, they put some hot dogs out on the grill and all the neighbors could come over. We had enough to share. That is not poverty. That's abundance. Even if it's small in what we're offering, it's an abundant heart and spirit, and those children learned a very different lesson than the wealthy family down the street who's still counting the amount of video games they've acquired and not wanting to share those with their friends. We've got room for one more. This conversation we went all day, and you're going to see, again, this is a potluck. We said we're doing the presentation, you guys are doing the presentation. So.
One thing I look at is
First name?
Todd.
Todd, all right, great. And then I don't know if that's your first name.
Cindy.
Cindy, great, thank you, Cindy. Todd?
One thing I look at poverty is a lack of knowledge or rejecting. You either lack it or sometimes you reject the knowledge that you should be getting, and it leads to that poverty mindset or that poverty standard. It's there, but I lack it, or it's there, or I rejected it because I'm stuck in a state of a poverty mindset.
Poverty of information here, and two, maybe we can connect the dots. As if you're in flight or fight mode, this other information is not useful, You're trying to tell me how to fill out an application. Well, we all know that application can get you fed. But if you're not realizing that there's a pathway to something bigger here, your information that you're giving is not being received. So you guys are on it right now. This is exactly what we're going to be thinking about. This is how a social factor can start influencing behavior in all of these different ways. I'm going to have you take the next one so my voice doesn't run out. We'll go back and forth.
I was enjoying it with you guys. So the next one is race, identity, and racism. How do you think that could play into a person's life? Anybody want to share? It's a loaded question.
First name?
Melanie. I would say where you maybe have a world view of where your access is limited.
Okay. That makes sense. Yes.
Marcia, I'll share by example, because it's always, I'm 68, but it always goes back to we have this conversation among our family and friends. My sister is 4 years younger than me, she was in kindergarten. We had a little Caucasian girl that they stuck together, and they ended up being in kindergarten on up to high school. But at one point, she invited her for her birthday party, and her mom is like, Caucasian lady, she said, oh, you can't go, we're not the same color as us. And both my sister and the girl crying that whole day in school, because she didn't understand why she had kids who couldn't go because they were different color. And we were taught in our home that the world is about to crayons. So my sister kept saying, if we're about to crayons, you can come. And you know, hey, crayons come to my party. And so she didn't come, but you know, it goes back to the racism and identifying, you know, at that early age, and my sister to this day, they have kept in contact with each other secretly. And now they're, you know, opening themselves, but they kept in contact, you know, that's been stolen and the red and white that goes to Charlie.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. Are children born racist? Yes.
I
You are?
Dee. I'm from Mississippi, which is still very much to this day a know your place state. I feel like, based on my experiences, the conditions of certain communities were the fault of the people in that community if they were a certain color. If they were lacking said color, it was the Democrats' fault. So it's like the bad things and the communities of people of color, we brought on ourselves with our laziness, you know, we not pulling ourselves up out of the bootstraps, even though systemically we were held back.
Right.
And the impoverished state of the communities of the people who were, like I said, not people of color, it was the fault of the Democrats. It's not their own, it's the Democrats' fault. Why I don't have no running water, why I don't read, or you know what I mean? Just like anything with us, it was our fault. We brought it upon ourselves and therefore did not need assistance or resources or funding for programs because we just needed to pick ourselves up out of the bootstraps.
Anyone else like to share? All right.
There are no bootstraps when you got no shoes.
Thank you.
All right. So the next one is peer influence. So think about this. How does peer influence, and we're thinking really of children today and youth as default. But I would like us to expand that dialogue, and we can even think about how adults continue to be influenced by one another. We're all influenced. Although I will say that specifically at the ages of 13 to 15, this is when an important transition should be happening to healthy children, and that is their social reference stop being in the home and start being out of the home. This is one of the reasons why, even in really good families, research has now shown us that even in real good families, if the community has many disparities in it, the youth will be at risk for offending and getting into trouble. So The reality is this is not dysfunctional psychopathological behavior. This is normative behavior that's occurring in a in a dysfunctional system where people start engaging in disruptive or antisocial behavior just as a way of socializing. So anyway, I gave you a sermon and I meant to ask you a question. How do you all see peer influence in shaping behavior? Some examples. This gentleman here in the front. First name?
Aaron.
Aaron, pleased to meet you for the first time ever.
Yes. I see it, it's a little easy to talk about negative peer influence, but I see it in classrooms when you encourage a handful of courageous and kind children to reach out and be upstanders and take care of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Positive peer identity is contagious.
Yes.
And I can speak, I know we're talking about kids, but as an adult, it is so nice to be in a live conference with a whole bunch of peers.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
Rejuvenated and with peers. So positive peer identity, I think is contagious, and I see how that works.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, isn't that really why we're here today? Is to get that contagion of positive influence. And the people you're meeting today will be thinking about. This is really the presentation. It's who you're going to meet. That's what this is about. And we're shaped all the time by one another for favorable, and children too. We can get kids to be positive influences for one another. You know, how does that shape positively how our youth can act? Because they're not going to listen to us, but they will listen to one another.
But they listen to the negative. It's
And
not
they listen,
always
and the negative in particular, yeah. So talk about it, please, because we're on peer influence. Sure.
Also peer
Glenn,
influence.
Yes. Oh, first name.
Glenn.
Of course,
Peer
Glenn.
peer influence increases, and it's really crazy how I think about it. Peer influence increases for lack of supervision. A lot of our kids are at home by themselves. We feel they're safe because they're at home, but you know, like I have a lady in my building, she works all the time. So she feels like her son is safe at home. She doesn't know. I catch him in the hallway smoking weed all the time. I catch people in her house all the time. I mean, she think everything is good, so that's how his influence on the streets increases by her not being present. And then all the time we have to realize that we have parents that are present, but their presence doesn't mean anything. You're in the house, but you're not doing anything. As long as your kid's in another room, they're quiet, you think that's good parenting, and it's not. So that's how the peer influence increases. And then I'm a mentor, so people kick their kids out all the time. You know, get out, get out. And then they're crying and they're laying on the floor when their kids get killed, when their kids get killed and laying out because they sent them to the streets. You kicked them out, they had nowhere else to go. Who do they turn to? They turn to the gangs. Yeah. So we have to be careful, you know, what we do to our kids because we increase the peer influence on the streets, how we handle them.
And here Dee Dee said, I'm just a parent. But we know parenting is a powerful force.
Right.
You know, you're present there, it makes all the difference. And two, we talked about poverty before this. You know, second shift job pays more than a first shift job.
Right.
You know, and somebody's got to keep the lights on. So it's tricky. You can see how one thing feeds into the other. Let's go on to the last factor here, and then Mr. Pressie can take this one. We could be talking about this all day. This is just more.
Social media. Social media, I'm sure everyone knows, can be a huge influence on people and how they think about themselves and interact with the world. Does anybody have any examples of?
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to like get off track at all, but I just did want to say that peers, in my experience, I'm Sydney, I'm a school counselor, and one of the most rewarding parts of my job is seeing how students, they look for they need each other. They look to support each other. They want that support from each other. They just like, they cringe for it. And when it breaks down, they come to me to help support that, to help them to get that. They need that so bad. From the girls, especially the girls that I deal with, the females around in the age of 12, 13, they are so desperate to to lean in on each other. And when that breaks down, oh my God, that's how my door sounds all day.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think boys are the same way. And I think Dr. Bill was sharing that at that age, people look for their peers for support. How about social media?
Yeah, I'm not into that.
So I know that one of the schools that I work at, I'm the school counselor, a place called Carter's Christian Academy. We have a lot of children that come to school with a lot of issues that were brought up by social media. Yes.
I was just whispering that to her. I was like, social media, I'm a school counselor, Jennifer, school counselor. And I was saying that all of the conflict and mediation that I deal with at work all starts in social media. When people they want to engage with each other.
Right.
And then it turns into like all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. A lot of drama. Yes.
I'm not certain when likes, follows, and subscribes turn into actual currency, but that's the way that people act. Their actual lives don't have to be together as long as it appears that way on social media. So many filters, so many different ways that you can Photoshop and do this and that, and their life looks great on the web.
Right.
And they're making zero progress at actually making their real life match the life that they portray on social media. And so many other people believe what we see. No investigation into anything at all. Man, she is living a life. Let me fake it till I make it. Now no one's just doing the same thing. Like y'all, yes. So social media, I feel like it's just like I said, I don't know when it became actual currency, but people live to look good on social media, and they do nothing about being good in real life.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yes.
Sonia, and I want to say to all the parents, I don't envy you when it comes to managing technology. I really don't. But I wanted to say, like, from, a woman who grew up with technology becoming a thing and now working with young girls, technology's become, and social media's become so dangerous where they're just so overly sexualized, and it pushes them to sexualize themselves to be wanted and to feel valued and to feel appreciated. And it is so dangerous for these young girls growing up and seeing all those filters, seeing all these people photoshopping themselves and selling yourself and feeling like that's the only way to like be a woman is to be sexualized on social media and to have, people 20, 30 years older than you reaching out to you, messaging you in a way that can't be restricted by parents, unfortunately.
Yeah. You Hamilton. Yes.
Social media is one of the biggest factors of anxiety and depression. A lot of young kids nowadays. And we're seeing it in younger, my kids, 20 years old, 8 years old. You get them off home from school, it's not always bad.
No.
We're going to move on, just in the interest of time. And I know, again, we're here to potluck. We've got everything. What we're going to learn from one another today, the greatest teachers you're going to have are at your elbow. And paying attention, getting to know people. The answers are in this room. But the problem is, we're right now only diagnosing something, and we're trying to get to the point where we can do something about it. I'm going to introduce a perspective to everybody today, and this is what I've been trained in as a clinician. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what this means and why I think this guy, Alfred Adler, was around died in 1937. What does he have to do with now, today? How could he possibly be relevant? And I'm going to share very briefly why. But partly because of the conversation we just had is that Adler said social factors are really important. We have to look at the context. We don't want to just look inside of the individual. At the time, psychologists were all finding the problems to be inside of people. They had a sex drive that was out of control, or they had a death drive that were trying to harm themselves. And they had all these understandings, and brain-based understandings even at the time, which turned out not to be very accurate, about why we're misbehaving. And Adler kept saying it's the world around us that's shaping us. And starting with the family, but then he looked at the broader society too. But what's interesting and it's important today is even as we were talking about these factors, did you notice how so many of them were negative? We first talked about the deficits, and we talked about the negative deficits. Then we talked about the social factors of poverty, race, social media and peer influence, and we saw some negative factors too. But we have to look at what we've got in a way where we can see opportunity also. We need to be able to be constructive, because those social influences are not going to change for our youth overnight. The peer influences are not going to change. What's going to maybe change is how we approach those, and as community members helping our young people, how do we guide them and support them to make good out of what's not so good, okay? This form of psychology is important for 3 basic reasons. Number 1, it's holistic, which means it looks like all aspects of the person. What type of music does the person listen to? What do they like to eat? What are the things that they enjoy doing? How do their physical attributes shape how people treat them, and then how they respond? Looking at everything in a person, you can learn a great deal about someone if you're not always looking for psychopathology. If you're not always looking for problems. You can find out about a person by looking at the whole person and all aspects of them and valuing them. Not just seeing a poverty case, not just seeing a kid who has psychopathology in some way, but looking at the whole person and being trained to look for that and to look for the strengths in that. Holistic. The other thing Adler said is everybody's goal-oriented. Kids do things for a reason. There's a purpose. If you're not understanding what that purpose is, it's that purpose that drives them. You know, if you think about it from the standpoint of being in a rough area, if you change your focus from, I want to get ahead and I want to have mine, if you change your focus real subtly to, I'm going to protect my younger siblings and care for them and give them a good model, a shift in goal can change everything. So our goal orientation is very important. Why are our young people on social media? And I've had young people, and I have had this, say, you know, Dr. Ben, I'm going to put something positive out there on social media. It's not what you have, it's how you use it that matters. So the goal of behavior is very important. And the last part is, Adler said people are creative. We make a way, we find a way. And think about it, there are people who've had really good upbringings that have made really bad choices. At various times in life, I'm one of them, right? We don't all make the right choice. We don't always, from what we're doing, make the best choices. But just because somebody had a bad experience doesn't mean that they're only going to make bad choices either. People are creative. They will surprise you. They will think about things in new ways. We can't just reduce somebody to the environment and their biology and think that this is going to describe them all. Because every now and then, there's a person who surprises us, who defies the odds. And that's what we're really cultivating and looking for as we're trying to help our youth and as we're trying to help people that we're serving in the community. We have to realize that people are not victims. And that's the idea of finding the creative self in the individual and accessing that. There's a term that's come out recently that I just wanted to make sure people knew that we're hip on now. And the term is intersectionality. Raise of hands if you've heard the terms intersectionality. Okay, all right, so this is a growing force. But this is basically how we're looking at things. All of these things are influencing somebody's identity. All of these things. And as we're trained clinicians and parents and foster parents, we can start asking questions about these different areas of life and experience. Now the challenge with this is that it seems to be a lot to look at, and there's three sets of spheres here. So we have in the middle, this is the person's lifeline, and we're experiencing ourselves at all times through these identities at different times of our life, So that's what that's talking about. These are the different spheres that we can be. We talked about poverty and race already. Indigeneity. What does that have to do? I'm not saying it very well. It's very appropriate because of where we are today. Indigenous identity, being, and I meant to say at the beginning today for us to honor and take a moment to think we're at Potawatomi Casino. There are peoples that were exterminated that lived here before us. So being mindful of the identity, where we are in relationship to the land, and that history. So all of these are factors, and then on the outside, these are outside forces that negatively impact on things. It's a very complex, sophisticated model. Now the challenge I have with this is when you're trying to work with somebody in a clinical setting, what do you do with this? It was hard for me to figure out how to do that, how to support somebody in knowing this. So what we did is we devised something called life factors mapping. And a life factor is, we're looking at things not just socially, but as biopsychosocial thing. It's this parts of our identity that are important to us. We're going to get into this. And we're going to be doing it through life factors mapping. Okay? Life factors are anything in the form of personal attributes, experiences, and personal priorities that shape and influence an individual's sense of self and their experience in the world and with others. And what's really important is we want people to tell us what's important about them. You know, when I ask people to introduce themselves today, I ask about profession. Why? Because we're here at a professional conference. However, if we were here and we all just happened to be at the casino and hanging out here together, I might ask who you are and what you're all about. You may share all sorts of different things about yourself. You're a parent, you're a musician, you're an athlete, or whatever. And all these little pieces, they matter. And we want to be able to look at the pieces, like Adler said, the holistic thing. We want to look at the pieces. And this is what we're going to be sharing. And you know, I understand that we had a link that we sent, and it was hard for some people to access. So if you want pen and paper, Ben Rader, BENRADER, at chosen, CHOSEN, chosen -families, FAMILIES.com. I'd be happy to send you a different version of this. Yes, you want to ask me? Ben Rader, BENRADER, at chosen, CHOSEN, -families, FAMILIES.com. You can also get in contact with the Fresh Start organizers, and they can get communication through me if you lose that. But anyway, my point is, I'd share this with you because this is the model that we came up with. And we're gonna look at it today, and I'm gonna walk through it, and if we've got a little time, we'll show you together how to use it. But you see each one of these different triangles here intersecting. They all identify a different part of the identity. And I'm going to walk you through this because it's a lot to look at. I'm going to walk you through it, and you'll have an idea of where everything is and why it's there in a second. And it will be coming back, so the picture you'll be seeing here in a second again. So we have biological factors. These all have to do with biological aspects of the identity of the person. Psychological factors have to do with how we think and how we see things and how we behave. And then social factors, we were just talking about before, the things outside of us, the social things outside of us that influence us. But what's interesting is no factor is entirely just one of these things. Like, let's think about something genetics. Let's think about body height. That's a largely biological thing, right? Body height. If I'm a tall person or a short person. Now that's a biological thing, right? But it has social implications. Who can ball? Tall people. Who's going to be a better horse jockey? Short people. So our body has social implications, and we only care about things really when it comes down to based on the social implications. Gender, pigmentation of skin, whether or not you have a disability at birth, a physical disability, all these shape how people treat you and how you start seeing yourself. So even physical and biological things are social in a way. And then what I'm going to point out is how these intersect. So these are the things that are just more or less biological. We think of them this way, although I could argue a case against any one of these. Intellectual capacities, we may think of it as a biological thing, that people just have it, innate ability. Neurosensory development. So that has to do with like people that are on the spectrum. We hear about that sometimes. It's like how do our senses organize and arranged, and some of that is just kind of more or less biological. Physical traits, we can't control health issues. Those are all biological. Now these are biological and social. Sex ascribed at birth. Someone makes a chart. They say, okay, this is male, this is female. It's biological, but there's also someone that is now labeling it and putting language to it. Family history. My family experiences start shaping how I am even before I was here. You know? So that's social, but it also shapes my biology. Just mentioned earlier, your metabolism can be impacted by epigenetics. So things that happened in prior generations influence how you are today. Historical trauma also. We talked today about historical trauma in terms of the system and how people start identifying relative to the system even before you're born. You know, so these are things that are biological and social. These are largely psycho-oriented, so this has to do with wellness and biology, health and fitness. AOD and sobriety, they're both biological and they're social. These are bio, psycho, and social. Sex and sexuality, trauma and loss, culture and heritage, disability, whether you've had treatment or not, what kinds of treatments, race identity, and racism. And I want to point something out, is that if you see things like sex ascribed at birth, that's something that somebody gave you the identity of. Now here, it's what you're doing with it, because it has to do with your choices and your decisions, right? So somebody says you're thus and such, and now you behave related to that, and you feel inside a certain kind of way, attracted to certain kind of people. It's how that expresses itself in your actions. Now we have gender identity and orientation is a social and a psycho thing. Education is psycho and social. Legal history and faith life, psycho and social. If you're brought up in a certain church or something, they're influencing how you're being raised. It's psycho, your thinking and behavior. It's social. It's a social context for your learning. Then we have work history, profession, where I served, where I've lived, significant relationships, comforts and struggles in civil life. These are all social things. And finally, we have things that are distinctly psycho or wellness, self-care, spirituality, mindfulness, creative practices, and nature life. And what's interesting is if you were to pick any one of these things, and I were to say, first name? Grover, that's right, you introduce yourself. Grover, pick something out here that seems pertinent to you, and you might say, you're not going to be a volunteer, just so you know. You might say what?
Race and identity.
Race and identity. So then we would zoom in on that, and we'd start asking Grover, well, why did you choose that, and why is that important to you? And what's interesting is if Grover picks something else. Education. And he starts telling me, because we're holistic, because all of us is a part of everything that we do. When he starts telling me about education, and I have my trained ear, I'm also going to hear how race and racism played into that as well. Because a drop of the ocean tastes like the whole ocean. So any aspect that we go into here, is going to give us information about the ocean of the person. Are you following me? So we can ask people about anything. And what's really cool, in something like this, you let them guide you. You say, tell me what makes sense. How will we get to know each other today? What time do we have? Okay, we're done. Everybody has to leave. No, I'm kidding. At 15 minutes, I'm joking. All right. So for this next part, we do want to have a volunteer. We're going to get a chair up here. Oh, here we go. Grover is going to volunteer. Have a seat here. All right. And I'm done talking for a minute. No, that's a lie. I'll keep talking. I had a hallway when I was a kid. And it was like down the hallway there was a bathroom, and my parents had a bathroom off of their bedroom, and they were connected by a shower room. Are you following this kind of? So what could happen is that my parents could walk down the hallway and past my bedroom, or they could sneak in through the bathrooms to avoid my bedroom, because my bedroom was like there's no way you're gonna get to bed on time if you walk past this guy's bedroom. Mom, I was thinking of something, and then I'd be sitting there talking. You've probably got, any parent in here, you've got a talker? Yeah, that's it, they'll be up here with a microphone at some point. All right, Grover, thank you for being here, and we're gonna go on here.
I don't know what I'm in for.
All right, that's it. We're gonna learn from it. We're gonna learn together. So we got it. This is it. You're part of the potluck now. All right. So Grover, I'm gonna hand the baton here off to Aaron in a second. You can look at our list again, and you can choose from this whatever you want. What would be a nice portal for us to get to know you? You can share what you can pick things you picked before. You can pick something different. It's completely up to you.
Oh, I'm gonna stick with what I chose before.
Race, identity, racism. All right. Great.
Education.
And education. Great. All right. So we're going to talk about these two factors: race, identity, and education. And there.
So, now please consider for a moment to say how it shaped you over the years, for better or for worse.
Okay.
Okay? Kindly take some time to share with us whatever detail you can, provide how this life factor has influenced your experiences in life, the person you have become.
Well, I can talk loud enough without a mic.
There's three of us.
I don't too much like microphones, but.
So, just so you understand, the
Yeah.
things we experience, tell us something about the world, and all of that. Tell us something about who we are.
Well, I grew up in Chicago, Chicago housing projects, and I had a experience with white folks, and it was a life-threatening experience. I was riding my bike around the old Comiskey Park. I think it's somewhere around 35th and Host, around that area. And I found myself surrounded by a bunch of white folks, and man, it was a death dying situation. They really wanted to hurt me. And out of the blue, this little old white lady come out of this house with a little house coat on. Back in the day, they wore house coats. Leave him alone, leave him alone. And it's like the Red Sea parted over because everybody moved out the way, and she's like, honey, go home, get on about your business, and y'all don't touch them. And I'm like, all these folks and this little old lady, but they parted, and I took off, and I must have been maybe about 17 years old, So mind you, that's 40 years ago. And, but that moment, it kind of shaped my identity about my relationships with white folks, but it didn't change it to the negative effects, per se, because one saved me out of 25.
So what does that tell you about the person? How does that influence the person you become?
Well, that experience, taught me, that, as a social worker and therapist, I know racism is a learned phenomenon. You don't just born a racist, that's something that's taught. But if this old lady can come out and say, leave him alone. So I look at this older lady as like, okay, she could have learned something totally different. She could have said, get that N-word and string him up. But she didn't. She said, leave him alone, let him go. So it shaped my relationship from that day forward, that there's good folks, good white folks, and bad white folks. Just to be totally honest.
Questions? Anybody have any questions or comments or observations?
My grandmother lived on 40th and Boston.
Bridgeport, right?
Bridgeport, yep. Thank you. That's the name of the area, Bridgeport. Yeah. That's where Mayor Daley was from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a comment. I read the book, or someone read the book called Finding Me by Viola Davis. And in that book, she had a very similar experience. And during that time, I think there were like several boys, a big group of boys. And when they chased her every day, they called her black, they called her ugly, they called her every name in that book. And, you know, I think something similar happened where somebody came out and, you know, saved her, you know. But later in the book, she talked about how she struggled all of her life, not feeling good about herself, about who she was, her beauty. I know that beauty issue came up a lot in her book. You know, is she beautiful? And, you know, as we know, she came on to be this wonderful actress and did some amazing things that a lot of people only dreamed of, you know, going to Juilliard and all this and that, and, you know, movies and stuff like that. But it just kind of goes to show that even though people can try to beat you down and beat the beauty out of you, beat the life out of you, you can still rise and feel good about yourself and do wonderful things with your life.
Because it looks like you've done it. Go ahead, Rose.
Yeah, you don't find too many black male therapists.
I just wanted to add to his experience, the comment basically. And this is not to say like we, and I say we because I am in the identity of being a black person, so it's not to say we need saving or people to step in, but when I think of that experience you just said, I think, you know, a lot of black people, unfortunately, we've experienced different scenarios like that, or different things where, you know, you feel your life was threatened, or you were discriminated against, or it was blatant racism. And that can really shape a person towards, you know, having a negative view towards white people. But I think when you have those experiences, like the one that was mentioned, and like ones I can think of for myself, where you do have a person that steps in, or says something, or does the right thing, or just changes the whole situation, I think those moments are really powerful, especially when you are a child. They're really powerful to change your view. And then, like he mentioned, you know, it made me realize there's good people and there's some bad people. And imagine if that experience had not happened, where that older white lady came out, where would that thinking have been as him growing into a man, where we thought to be about white people at that time? You know, so I think those moments are very powerful when they do happen. So.
I had a question. Did you go home and tell your parents about the situation? And if so, what did your parents say? And how did what they say influence you or your outlook on what happened to you and shape your behavior towards the person you are today?
Well, no, I didn't share this with my parents because I had none at the time. My father got killed when I was 8 years old, and my mother didn't raise me, so I was living with an uncle of mine who was a member of a gang. So that kind of tells you what that story kind of looks like during that time, which I don't mind talking about at some point because it kind of helped shape who I am today.
This is incredible. First of all, I want to thank Grover. Round of applause. I think you also mentioned education, and we got time. We may go back to that today too. But I'm going to just interject quickly. And I'm thinking like a clinician in a way all the time. And one of the things that I noticed is this is what Adler could have called this an early recollection. How old were you at the time?
17.
17. Okay, so this normally would be early recollections. You think is like earlier than 10. But this can pass because it's a narrative story and it tells a story about things around him. And I want to pay attention to this here. We've got this. Around us, this is what we're all doing through life. We're answering these questions. I am, others are, the world is. And then, therefore I must, or therefore I will. Okay? I am, others are, the world is, and therefore I must, or therefore I will. And I'm thinking about this now as Grover's sharing, and I'm thinking about this from a standpoint of what is it that Grover's about now, and how does this point in that direction, you know? And Aaron, you want to take any stabs at maybe how Grover might be answering some of these questions, and we're going to check in with Grover. But normally what we're doing is we're kind of playing detective. You know, we're trying to connect, just like a kid. You say to a kid, well, why'd you do it? They'll always say, I don't know. You know, and what we're going to do is we're going to try to connect the dots and then communicate it with Grover to see if this seems to make sense. But you're going to take a stab at any of those. What did he learn about those things?
Wow. So, as a therapist, I wouldn't guess. I'd ask you. So you need to know that. But I am, I'd say, safe. Others are dangerous and safe. Therefore, the world is both. The world is dangerous and it's safe. And therefore, I must be open-minded to both.
Okay.
What do you think?
I think those are very safe answers. Or very safe questions. But they are realistic to me.
Okay.
Yes, they are.
So, what do you believe that these 4 things mean for growth? I am
Survivor.
Pardon me?
Survivor.
Yeah.
Okay. Others are
Dangerous to me.
the world is
Unwelcoming at times.
and therefore I must
Protect my peace. Succeed.
I am watching time, and I realize this is like the time we're supposed to be wrapping up, and I want to make sure that we're not over. So a mentor of mine once said, Ben, you can say whatever you want when you're up there, but don't end 1 minute late. The audience will not forgive you for that. There's a sense to it, but I also know we got started a little late, so if we need a little breathing room, I think is important. What we saw here is Aaron checking in and also giving power to Grover. And we know there's equality in this relationship in the sense of being able to welcome feedback, because when Aaron shared something, Grover said, yeah, you're in the ballpark, but you're safe, you know? And then Grover felt safe and he could share a little bit more. You see that? So what we do is we get the conversation going. And when you're working with a young person and you're asking about some area of their life, you can think about these three things, and there are things you can kind of check in on. What are the decisions that you made about yourself? Now, the other thing that's important to realize about everything is that we're talking to Grover here today. So it's interesting that Grover's memory involved experiences of race and racism at a conference that's focused on race, in a presentation that just brought it up shortly before, and with a white and a black co-presenters, right? So the formula was perfect for this memory to come out, right? But what happens with memories is they're Rolodex for our history, and we're always asking ourselves, well, who am I? What are others about? What kind of world am I in? Grover made a decision at one point, not only to survive, which he's continued to do, but he's also here as a helper. There's also something that, as my trained ear would be listening for, is also how does that inform the approach he takes to therapy and as a therapist. So, you know, if we were to get down now into that education you brought up, we won't have time for it, or professional development, and we get him to share about those things, we still have a flavor of the ocean. We get a sense of Grover through all of that, and we learn more information because we're bringing in more data points. Does this make sense? Are you following what I said? This tool can be incredibly helpful, and in a way, it can almost replace an intake that we normally have. You know, if you can get presenting problems, diagnosis, that type of thing, and you're a therapist and you need that, you still have to do that. But when you're really getting to know a person, if you give them control over it, if you give them something that looks like this, something that looks like that, and you let them guide us, Grover's perfectly safe in pulling something out. The one last thing that I want to point out is I never make an assumption about what people are going to choose. Kind of, sort of. I was hoping we were going to talk about race today because we have such a special conference and a safe place to talk about that. But you can't assume just because you have a person of color that they want to talk about race again. You don't want to talk just because somebody's trans that they're going to think about that as their main identity today. Like, let's let them decide what they want to talk about, you know? So that's where something like this is incredibly powerful too, because normally the things that we think we have to ask about, we may have no business asking until we got a relationship that's formed. Right. But because of the dynamics today, we're able to go right there. Yes, please, questions, comments, and we're there anyways, yes.
Is there any way that Grover can go from being a survivor, moving out of that mold in his mind? Because that was a past experience. He was able to overcome that, as they say, narrative, based on your education and what you're doing now. Is there any way where the mind, as we say, poverty mentality, does the mind change from being a survivor?
Yeah, right. Excellent question. Science and biology and research shows us that it's very hard for us to change some of these earliest experiences. But what Grover would be able to do, and what I'm suspecting Grover has done, is he's been able to access that experience of survival, and I suspect he's applying it now to helping other children survive. So what he's making, how he's making use of that is in a socially advantageous way. It's like I said, the kid who's an older brother can go out and try to survive in the world and be tough in the streets, or he can turn his energy towards the siblings. And I suspect what we'd be looking for is asking Grover a question more like, how might have you used this in a way that's allowed you to benefit and serve others, and he'd have a question. The survivor mindset, though, I suspect some of that basic priming, that's part of maybe how we're going to experience life all the time. If you've experienced a burn, you're always going to be a little anxious around a flame. And this room is full of people, all of us have been burned. And remembering that is actually a technique to help you survive, is going to allow you to find a use for it. Does that help?
That was perfect, and I asked for self.
Cool, great, thank you. Any other questions, comments, relevance? People, if you want to flag either one of us down and chat about these things, we are so honored to have everyone here, and yes?
The only thing I was thinking about was such a rich diagram and so many ways you can kind of get into it, a person's life. Was it life anchors?
Yeah.
How would you document all of that?
Yeah, well, listen, I'll tell you what I've learned how to do, is I've got a recording device in my brain, and I'm remembering off of it. But some information you'll document and some you don't. You have to always think about, does the auditor need to be seeing this? And if it got called into court or something, would it share information that's not useful? So I document it in my heart. And there's some of it that might go down on the paper. That's an excellent question. I know it's time. Everybody, thank you. Please hit us up if you need us. Thank you for, this is a great reception and a big turnout. We really are.